My name is Rune Fardal. I work with human rights in Norway, and in that work I have a need for a tool to access the premises from the judgments in the European Court of Human Rights. In that regard, I have developed a program for this, and the code I have used here has taken some time to learn, so I thought I would share it with more people who may have similar needs. The program is mainly about selecting certain premises in a table and then creating a new table with the selected premises. So in this program, this video, I will 1. Tell what the program does, 2. How the program works, and 3. But last but not the least, how the coding of the program is done. Let me first tell you what this program does. If we are to use an HTML language, we can say text content in the program contains information about the various premises that can be derived from judgments in European Court of Human Rights. Judgment handed down against mainly Norway in cases involving child welfare, the so-called barnevernet. As is well known, Norway has been convicted of human rights violation dozens of times in such cases in recent years. And with the help of these premises, one can make demands on child welfare. Courts, experts, and the administration work in such cases. They are obliged to follow these premises, which are above national law. In other words, the premises provide legal guidance for how the Child Welfare Service, county boards, courts, and experts can operate. If you know these premises, you can make demands and monitor that children's and families' rights are safeguarded. And since they come from the European Court of Human Rights, then they apply to the whole of Europe. That means for childcare systems regarding about 800 million people. So let's see how this program works. The program consists of a main table, which you see here, where each row contains a premise from these judgments in the European Court of Human Rights. In the text column, the premise is described in a short form, here in Norwegian, but if your browser translates the page, you get this in your own language. There are several hundred such rows of premises. The program can be found at the following link. On this front page, the judgments from which the premises are taken are listed. Let's take a brief look at it. At the front page here, you see a photo of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. And if you scroll down here, this page is written in Norwegian language, but you can use Google Translate to translate all the text in this page, so you can get it on your own language. But anyway, here are the court decisions, different cases, mostly against Norway, but also one against France, and some cases that didn't come up. And here are some Norwegian court decisions from High Court and some paper from the Ministers of Children and Family Department. These cases you can click on and you get the court decision from Grand Chamber here, and you can go down and take a look at these. Behind everyone, most of them anyway, there is a list, and that's a list of the premises I can take out from these court decisions. So this is premise number 202 in the Strand Lobben and others versus Norway. And this is the, in English, I can click on this, you get a bigger picture. This is the English written in the court decision. I have here a Norwegian translation, and then I have a short version of the Norwegian, or the premise, what it contains. Yeah, the list form, top of here, same, you can click here to get the full court decision. So that's basically what this is about. Yeah, and I can also mention also that table, it put up the same premises in another way, not a list, but in table, and you can click on them and you get the same back again. So let's go back to front page. You have seen this, you can go through this yourself. What's interesting here, also for this film, is what's coming behind that picture. I click on the picture and then I get this up. You can translate this. It's just mostly how to use this table, and this is the main thing, the table. You see, every time I move the cursor over it get yellow, so you can see where you are. One line here is one premise from this decision. This is Lobben, premise 202, and then you have some other coming down here. Lobben concurring opinion, where not the majority but some judges say the words. And you have KO and VM versus Norway. You have Abdi versus Norway, and different cases. This one gives you the same picture as we just saw. Here is the short version of what this premise is about. It's in Norwegian here, but for the purpose of this program, it doesn't make any difference. And here you can see what's happening. When I move the cursor over the line number, or the premise number, the row number, you get up the premise 202 from the Lobben, and that's printed off from court papers. So this is the decision the court make, and I have marked in yellow what I take out and make a premise of. This is actually decision that the Norwegian childcare and police and experts and whatever have to follow. So this is just show you how this works. They come up, all of them, and it says short here. If you translate the page, you can see what this means. And behind here, I have 3 buttons. So if I click green, that means I have marked the first line, the first row. This premise has been marked. And I can click gray, this one. It's still marked, but it changed color to gray in the text. And then white, take away the marking, so it doesn't stay marked anymore. And the point here, I can go down, click on this one, you get to the bottom of the page. Here are the end of the premises. It's 276 at the moment. And you see the premises are coming up. The point with this table is that this long table containing all the premises, you don't need all of them all the time, so you go in and mark the one you need, like this. Now they're marked. I can make it gray, it's still marked, or I can have it green. And then I want to have a new list of the premises that I have marked in this big table. I click on this green one here, and then a new table is coming up in the bottom here. You have the same elements. You could click here and get the case up, and this row is just the row number in this new table, 1, 2, 3, 4. I can delete single ones here, And the last one is just the numerical value of the first one, 271, and that's the numerical value. I have some ideas about this, so this may change in the future. That is the key thing about this program. It takes the chosen premises from the main table and make a new one, which you then can use in a meeting with childcare, expert, court, different things like that. There are some key features here. You can delete one. If you see here, the last one here is 275. It's up here 275. If I delete this one, it also deletes 275 here. So now I have a list of 3. The red one here, delete all of them. And if I want to have this one in, so I have 4, I click a new list and I have the 4 coming up. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's how this works in simplicity. I can print them out. This one, light blue, if I click here, I get a pop-up window with this list, or if I click on the darker blue here, it lists in a new window, and you can print out a normal, save as PDF, or I can change for my printer and print it out. So that's how that one works. Back to the table. I mentioned the delete button. So if I delete here, you see they are disappearing in the main list up here. So I can delete, delete, delete. This one, if you have one list here, you can delete all of them here. But they are not deleted here until you clear them here. Okay, that was how this program functions. And I will now show you how this is programmed, how this can happen. Well, that was a bit about the intention and use of the program. So for the purpose of this movie, to show the codes I have used to make this work. Codes others certainly can benefit from when you want to take items out of one table and create a new table. The program is built around a main table. And since the program has thousands of lines, including a number of JavaScript functions that has many text lines in themselves, I choose to put some functions on external JS files that are called at the beginning of the main program when the program runs. It is important to remember that functions to be used must be uploaded before they are used. Therefore, they are placed at the top of the code in the head tag. What you see here is the code for calling these 5 files. The text code on the main program itself consists of a large table identified as prem table, where each row constitutes a premise. As of today, there are 6 columns in each of these rows. This is the code for the first row of the table. Actually, the heading of the table. It has a light turquoise color, as you can see here. Also note that the main table is uniquely identified as prem table, as you see on the top of the text. It stands for premise table. This is the code for the following rows, which there are hundreds of, one for each premise. As we can see, this row consists of 6 columns. Before we go into detail on what it contains, let's see what effect it has on the screen. This is the result of the first row after the heading row with the number 001. in the table. I will go through this in detail for you. The first column with premises in this row shows 0, 0, 1, which you see at the bottom to the right. It stands for row number. In the HTML code, it is given unique ID equal NR001. The first column with premises in this row shows 001, which you see at the bottom to the left. It stands for row number. In the HTML code, it is given unique ID equal NR001. But as you can see, there is a lot more to this code. In this cell, there is a on-mouse over and on-mouse out function. This means that if I move the cursor over this cell, it triggers something. And as I showed you over, it's a pop-up window. To make it easier to understand what this code does, let's try it out. What happens when I move the cursor over the cell with row number 001 at the top left is that a pop-up window with an text image appears. This is the picture of premise 202 in Strandlobben vs. Norway. It is the original text of the judgment. The image that appears has a width of 900 pixels. I tried to figure out how to control the size of the pop-up window, but I found no answer. So I went in and made all the images with a width of 900 pixels. But let's take a closer look at the code. I have seen that the first line contains an id element NR001. The value of this is the text that comes right after, namely 001, as you can see here at the end of the line. Otherwise, in this line there are two functions, image appear and image disappear, that is activated when mouse move over and out. These two functions look like this. They make the pop-up window visible and invisible when the mouse is moved over the cell. The ID value you put into these functions also determines where the pop-up window is positioned. In the code here, I use the same ID as I move the mouse over. It makes the pop-up window come just below that cell. If I change the id value in these functions to the value in, for example, the third column, for example, PNG003, as you see in the code here, then the pop-up window for the third row will be below the third row when I move the cursor over the cell in the first row, as shown here. The next line is a new id with an image tag with ID attribute PNG001. I use the term PNG to indicate that this is an id of the file type I use in the images that appear, namely PNG files. 001 to indicate that it's the first cell in the column. The code for the first column in second row is PNG002, etc. You saw that when I move the cursor over the cell, a picture popped up. This means that there must be a href link here, a hyperlink. A link to an image that is located somewhere. But in the text here, there are no such links visible. If we first skip the style part, we see that there is a script tag here. In the first line, we have a Getelementbyid function. It returns the item that has the ID attribute with the specified value. In this case, it returns the value of the variable PNG001. I assign that value in the variable I have called img001, as you can see here. Then I give img.src, the source, the value in the variable png_001. But what is this variable? Well, this is the link to the image. So here is the href link coming in. This is an image from one of the external files with variables. In the second line here, you see that the variable png_001 is given a value, and that value is the link code of the image. The reason I choose this solution is that I want the link code as a variable. Then it can be used elsewhere without me having to rewrite the entire code, and should I need to change the code, it only happens in one place in the variable file. In the code you also see a style tag. Since the style code is the same in every single row, and with several hundred such rows, I defined it in one place and call it up. I created a class element that was placed inside the head tag at the beginning of the program. It looked like this. I call it style_png to show that it is the style of the display of the PNG images that appear in the pop-up window. After it was defined, the code for this row looked like this. Class equal style_png. The second column is identified as box001 and contains a short text to describe what information the premise contains. Here I have called the text cell box, and since it is box number 1 in the column, it becomes box001. It contains a brief description of the information that came up in the pop-up window when we had the cursor over the first cell. The content of box001 is thus the text in the cell in the column marked text. The third column is first centered through align equal center code in the cell element, and then given a unique ID identified in an A tag as link_001. A tag target blank has also been included, so when that link is called upon, it will open up in a new window in the browser. Building the code for this column was a little bit of a challenge. I could have just entered the URL and the URL text as a regular A tag, but wanted to turn both of these into variables. This is because this will be used in the new dynamic table created by the premises selected from the main table. Thus, these variables are used in several places. After much searching online, I found this code. The variable URL_001 contains the URL code of the hyperlink in the first row. The variable URL text_001 contains the link text as we see it on the screen here, Loben P202. The document method GetElementById returns an element object that represents the element whose ID property matches the specific string. Since item IDs must be unique if specified, they are a useful way to access a particular item quickly. ID equal link_001 thus take the place of a regular A tag. And I could use a regular A tag if it wasn't for the fact that I wanted the link as a variable. But this ID is not worth anything if you don't add some values to the various elements it consists of. Therefore, link001.href is set equal to a variable called Earl_001. I will soon show you what it contains. But as we know, a regular A tag has both a link and a text you click on to activate the link, and this text is in the variable EarlText_001. The definition of these variables I have put in a separate external file. In the external file you can see I define the variables Earl_001 as a link and the variable EarlText_001 as the text of the link. You can see that under the column premise, the text entered in the variable appears. In the first row, the text is Lobben P202, premise 202 from the Lobben case. As you can see, there is also a variable called PNG_001 associated with the variables for the first row. It's the link to the PNG image that came up when I hovered over the first cell in the row. All of these variables for each row are placed on a separate external JS file. You can see that the variables for the second row are just below and the other rows follow further down the file. Furthermore, there are 3 rows that are buttons, where I have an id that defines the color the button will result in. Here LGR light green, that's what is say for 001 by onClick. LGR is an abbreviation for light green. Click on one of these 3 buttons will call upon a function called choice, where the element this in parentheses depends on which button is pressed. Here I use this in the function's parentheses, and this is an element when used in a function gets a value depending on how the function is activated or called upon. Here the value of this depends on which of the 3 buttons I press. All 3 open the same function, but the value of this depends on the id value of the data I press. If I press the button marked green, ID equal LGR001 is set. The id is unique and different from all other buttons on the table, and there are hundreds of them. Since there is a choice function for each row in the program, there will be quite a few hundred of these eventually. Therefore, all choice functions are placed in an external file. What this choice function does is to see which of the 3 buttons is pressed. If lm.id equal LRG001, then set the background color of the cell with the ID box 001 to light green, and the background color of the cell NR001 is set to red, and the value of the variable bx1 is set to 1. It is set to 1 and not 0 because I use this in other functions as a sign that this premise is activated. If lm.id does not equal LGR001, then check the code about lm.id equal GRA001. That's therefore gray 001, which sets the background color in the text column to gray. And if element.id does not have any of these 2 values, then all backgrounds are set to white and bx1 is set equal to 0. The premise or row is then no longer activated. Activation is a prerequisite for being listed in the new table. The code in this function, of which there is one in each row, thus sets the color of the row depending on which button is pressed, and it activates or deactivates a row or a premise for a new table. Let's see in practice what happens in the program. If I press the green button, this happens. The cell in the NR column is marked red, and background in the text field is marked light green, and the variable bx1 is set to 1 to indicate that the premise is activated. If I press the gray button, the background of the text field becomes gray, as shown here. But as long as the NR field is red, the premise is still activated. And if I press the white button, all colors are removed and the variable bx1 is set to 0. The premise is not activated. All this happen in the function choice001. Each row has its unique choice function. Well, now I have shown what the code looks like and how it works for each row. Each cell in each row thus has its own identification. If we click on the link in the third column in row 1 with the text Lobben P202, this image will appear in a new window. On the left side, there is a copy from premise 202 from the judgment Strand and Lobben vs. Norway from 2019. It is the same text that appear in the pop-up when you move the cursor over the first cell in the first row marked 001. In the yellow field, there is a Norwegian translation of that text, and in the bubble there is a brief description of the essentials of this premise. The essentials are reproduced in the text column in the table. In this case, that there is a threshold to intervene in a family, if you translate the Norwegian text. If you now go to the bottom of the table, we see this picture. Here are 4 buttons, a green which creates a new table of the rows or premises we have marked by pressing the green button for a premise in the main table. Furthermore, there are 2 blue buttons that open the new table either in a pop-up window or on a new page. And then we have the red button that deletes the new table from the screen. Let's first look at the green button. I will first mark some premises. Now we have marked some premises, and then we press the green button. Then 2 things happen. One is that a new table is made of the marked premises or rows in the main table, and the other is that the screen scrolls up so we see the lower part of the screen. The latter is done so that parts of the table do not go under the screen, so that we have to scroll up the page to see the entire new table. This is what it looks like now. In the new table, we see in the third column, premise, that we have a link. In column 4, we have a row number in the new table, and in column 5, a delete button, which both deletes the premise in the new table and resets the premise in the main table above. The last column is currently only the string in the first NR column converted to a numeric number. Before we press the green button, this is what we see in the program. 4 buttons with different color and first row in the new table. The top half of the code for this is 4 button types, as you can see here. The first will on click call the function make all rows. The next call the function open popup. The third call the function open new window, and the latter calls the function delete all rows. Before we take a closer look at the code that creates the new table, we can briefly look at the style definitions we use on each button. These are defined in the head section at the top of the program as class attributes and look like this. One for each button, where the first one has the name style underscore but1, etc. This is the make all rows function, which creates the new table. The make all row function is activated by the green button and is located in an external file. It starts by setting the number of rows to 0 in the variable nr rows. Then it asks for each row if the variable bxn equal 1. That means that the row or premise is activated. If so, the make row function is activated and it has 5 variables or elements in its parentheses. The first variable in make row is the value of bxn, which is equal to 1. It is probably unnecessary because for the function to be activated for the current premise, bx for n must be equal to 1. The second is nr001, whose value is row number in the original table. The third is the value of the variable box001, which is the text in the table's text column. That means the text that briefly describes the content of the premise. The fourth is the variable that contains the URL address in URL underscore 001. And the fifth is the variable that contains the URL text of URL text underscore 001. For each row or premise, this function is tested to see if the premise is activated. That means that the bxn variable is set equal to 1. But note that it is not the function make all rows that create the new row. It only has 5 variables whose content depend on the row number in the original table. Thus, there are as many lines in this function as there are rows in the table, prem table. This is the make row function that generates the individual lines in the new table based on what is activated in the original table. Under the code, you can see what the first line of the new table looks like after this function is activated. The first part of the make row function defines the variables that make up the first row. The table variable is set equal to document.getElementById and in parentheses new table. And that's the ID of the table with the turquoise line of heading that we described in the code above. The variable row equal table.insertRow. Inserts a new row. Cell 1 to 6 inserts the individual columns in the row based on the table new table. The variable premnr is set equal to the numerical value of the other variable in the function, namely the value of b. Well, after defining the table comes the second part of the make row function. We have explained the variables a and b in the parentheses of this function. It begins by examining if a equal 1, that means bxn equal 1. If so, all the cells in the new row are assigned a value and background color is set on the various cells. If not, the row in the new table will not be displayed. Put simply, if the row for the premise is activated, then the premise is included in the new table. Where a equal 1, the content of cell 1 are set equal to b.innerHTML, which for row 1 in the original table is the value of ID equal NR001. As we remember, the value of what is written between the div tags, namely id element NR001, is equal to the string 001, as I have highlighted here. This is the value we see in the first column with a red background. The next div tag is associated with what happens when the cursor is moved over the first cell in a column. This ID equal PNG div 001. And that tag is not something that is assigned to any cell, but a process that takes place given the movement of a mouse over a cell. Cell 2's inner HTML is set equal to c.innerHTML, and c is the string in the second column and has, in the case of the first row, ID equal box 001. This box 001's inner HTML is thus the string in the second column. The value of the words in the light green cell in column number 2. The third cell contains the link to the image with the current premise. Here HTML code is inserted as cell 3's inner HTML. It starts with centering of the text in the cell. Then plus first part of a tag with a equal with a href equal, then plus d, which is the fourth variable in the makeRow function. The variable d equals the variable URL_001 for the first row of the main table. It contains the link to an image with information about the premise. We remember URL_001 from the variable hyperlink file. The fifth variable in makeRow is e, which constitutes the variable URLText_001 for the first row of the main table. The variable e enters here and then the a tag ends. Finally, the center tag ends the content of cell 3.innerHTML. Thus, the value of cell 3 is the link to the image with the premises. Cell 4 is just row number in the new table, centered in the cell. The next one, cell 5, is a little more complicated, and it took me a while to figure out exactly the right code to get this done. The code for cell 5 in its purest form look like this. But it is not possible to write it like this when you want to be entered as a code in inner HTML for cell 5. Then it must be written in a different way. Then it must be written like this. This is a cell with a button that activates a del row function to delete the row in the new table. Before we see how to write it, let's look at the del row function that is called. As we see, that function is on a separate external file and has two variables in parentheses. The first is n, which is the row number in the new table. Remember that this is a function that comes in the new table and deletes a row in that table. N must therefore be row number plus 1 because the first row in a table is row 0. N does constitute nr rows plus 1. P constitute prem nr, the premise number in the main table. We see that n is the number of the row that is deleted in new table. It is deleted through the element document p is entered, which is the premise number or row number in the main table, prem table. And since premise number p is to be deleted, it must at the same time be deactivated in the main table. For that to happen, the variable bxp must be set equal to 0. After that, two new functions, make all looked at above and delete all rows are called. The delete all rows function look like this. It goes through all rows from 0 to nr rows and delete row number 1 in the new table, new table. This is the function behind the red button. The variable nr rows, that means the number of rows in the new table, is created in the make all rows function. The value to be entered in cell 5's inner HTML portion must be written like the image here. The first yellow part, marked 1, is the first part. Then plus the second part, which is the one marked blue. Then plus comma in part 3 and plus the variable prem number in number 4. The variable prem nr is the second variable in the del row np function. It sets the current bx variable to 0 in the row to be deleted. In other words, it deactivates the current row or premise and makes the background white in the current row in the main table. Then come part 5 and then part 6 with the text delete in the button, and finally end button tag. In addition to this, absolutely necessary, cell 5 has a style tag with a white background, red frame and black text on the delete button. The text in the link is also highlighted in bold, and finally the text is centered in the cell. In such a code, there are many small details, and if they are not correct, then the function does not work. Written in this way, it can be a little difficult to see the hole in the code. So let me write in more clearly. Written in this way also works just fine when the program is run. Now we can see clearly what between the center tags there is a button tag. The button tag has a style component that sets the background in button to white with a red border color. After style comes onClick, which when pressed activate the del row function, which has two variables. The first variable was row number in the new table. The second is row number in the main table, prem table. That means the table with all the premises. Finally, there is the text delete in the button element, and this one is marked in bold. After that, it's end button and end center. Cell 6 contains the row number in numerical form and not as a string in cell 1. This value is also centered in the cell. I have certain plans for this cell that will come later. The last part of the make row function sets the background color of the 6 cells in the new table, as you can see here. Taken as a whole, the code that assigns the cells in the row its inner HTML value, this, when it's ready to go. Well, then I have explained the most complex of the features, The program thus generates a new table as shown here. The two blue buttons write the same table in a pop-up window or a new window or tab in the browser. The pop-up function look like this. First the variables are defined and then new table is written in the new pop-up window. The result typically look like this. The headline says printout of ECHR premise from sachindi.com/echr.html. Under the new table is a blue button that prints the page or save it as a PDF file. To open a new window or new tab, the function look like this. First the variable are defined and then new table is written in the new window. The result typically look like this. Same as in the pop-up window. We have mentioned the last red button in the review of the delete all rows function. It deletes all premises or rows in the new table. Well, then I have shown you how you can program in HTML and JavaScript to select rows in a table and print them in a new table. I hope this was informative. If you want to try to see how it works, you have the link here. When that page comes up, then click on the large image at the top to bring up the table with all the premises from European Court of Human Rights. And why the cells, the cursor moves over, turn yellow in the table, then it comes of this hover element, which is written in the code at the top of the head tag among the style definitions in the main table. TD means it sets the color of the cell, but it can be replaced by TR for the color of the whole row every time you move over. Now there are probably parts of this code that can be done differently and certainly more efficiently, but this code works and that is the most important thing. Well, then I thank you for now and I hope you can benefit from this information. And one last thing, don't forget to click the subscribe button and share it with a friend. Have a nice day.